Today we're going to learn about eye movement. When I was younger, they told me I was learning disabled. Learning disabled. I couldn't read very well. I had headaches when I would read. I read slowly. I didn't like to read. I thought about this for a long time. Why was I learning disabled, and why did I have such a hard time reading? My father was an attorney, and he could speed read. And he would read so fast that I couldn't even understand what he was saying. I would lie with him, and he would read to me. He would sound like, I would just go really, really fast. And I'd say, "Dad, slow down. I can't understand what you're saying." And I thought, why can't I do that? And so I studied reading in my master's program. And then when I began my doctorate as well, I discovered some things, and I also studied Chinese, and I learned a lot about reading by learning Chinese, and I learned a lot about our own language and how it's constructed. For instance, this word here is made up of dis, which means inversion or negative, and then this over here is able. So in other words, it means not able. And all of our words are constructed like this. I learned a lot about reading, and I learned really how to read by learning about reading. What we do in music is I'm teaching reading music. And when we teach reading music, we're also teaching reading, because we're building the same brain cells to read music as we need when we read. And we're creating not just great music readers, but we're creating great readers. So I can advertise that as a music teacher. Your son or daughter is going to become a much better reader, and it's true. This is why. Well, let's go back to this idea of learning disabled. It's a peculiar idea to me now, because I realize that reading itself is actually not natural. It's not natural at all. The reason it's not natural is because reading is a human invention. There's nothing in nature that resembles reading at all. Nothing even comes close to resemble reading. Because writing is a human invention, right? So most probably started out as people just writing in the sand, just little scripts. If you look at our numbers, the first couple of numbers are 1, 2, and 3. Well, how did those come about? Well, we know how 1 came about. Somebody just drawing a line in the sand. How did 2 come about? Well, it probably came about by drawing 2 lines in the sand. And after a while, they just didn't lift up their finger, and that eventually turned into a 2. And then you can see how 3 came about. You draw 3 lines in the sand. When you draw them fast, you end up with a 3. And then the other numbers, who knows? Although I think 4 has 4 lines or something like that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can see how that came about. And then 5, maybe they just drew a C or something like that. Because in Roman numerals you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 is the V. So they came up with the same thing in the Roman, the Arabic, and then in Chinese, you have 1, 2, 3, and oddly enough, the Chinese 4 looks like that. It's almost like an inside out for R4. But you can see it just started, with this drawing in the sand kind of thing, or drawing on a slate. If you think of the government, you have the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislature. Where's that word come from? Legislate. Well, we're musicians, so we know what a ledger is. But that's the staff. And what is slate? It's a piece of stone. You take a slate, you draw a ledger on it, you start making rules. All of a sudden, you're the legislate. You're the legislature. So that's how our language is constructed. Goes all the way back. Our history is built into our language. So the writing is a human invention. If writing words is a human invention, there's nothing really in nature that resembles it, then reading must also be a human invention. So if it's not natural to read, how could somebody be learning disabled if they're not good at reading? You're not meant to read anyway. Now, teachers, nobody wants to hear that, right? But It's true. Tell your teachers, we're not supposed to read. Now, reading is very important. Don't get me wrong. You have to read. You have to be a good reader. That's why we want people learning music. That's why I want people learning music. So, was I learning disabled? Well, we could go into a whole other situation about that, about things that affect the brain and the foods you eat and ingest into your body and how it affects your body, but that's outside the scope of what we're doing here. Just know that reading is a human invention because writing is a human invention, and reading is the flip side of writing. What are the eyes supposed to do? If we're not supposed to read, what are we supposed to do? Why do we have eyes? Well, let's say a long time ago, you're just sitting there. There's some field. And you're just lying on the plain. We'll put a tree here. And you're just kind of sitting back, just watching the sky. Just having a good old time doing nothing. And now, all of a sudden, there's movement. Right over here. Well, something moved behind you. You have to look. You have to turn and look, right? Why? Why can't you just be like, something's moving. I don't have to worry about it. Why do you have to turn and look? Might be a predator. Exactly. Predator is somebody who wants to eat you. Could be a lion. Could be a bear. Could be a hyena. Now, maybe it's not a predator, but maybe you haven't eaten in 3 days. There's another reason you might want to look. If it's not a predator, if it's not something bigger than you, it could be something smaller than you. It could be prey, right? What is that? P-R-E-Y? Okay. Prey, which means now you're the predator, and that's the thing that's going to get eaten. Because at the end of the day, we got to eat, right? Could be predator, could be prey, or could be something else. We'll give this guy a bow tie. He's nice and dapper. Could be some dapper young man or some pretty girl. She looks a little devious, doesn't she? Anyway, so it could be a predator, or it could be a prey, or it could be something else that catches your interest, right? And we call that a mate, which means friend, of course. Could be predator, prey, or mate. So you have to look. You can't not look if something's moving. It's impossible. It is literally a matter of life or death. Either your life, or somebody else's life, or the new baby's life, right? So it's predator, prey, or mate. That's the reason we have eyes. Now, I think we talked a while ago about the different senses, and that each sense gives you a little bit further distance. And so the eyes give you very far distance, because you have to know if something's coming down the hill. You better climb up that tree or run or something. So that's the purpose of the eyes. The original intended purpose of nature, it lets you see predator, prey, and mate. Keeps you alive. What is not the purpose of the eyes is reading. This is the purpose of the eyes. Now, we use our eyes to read, and it's very important. We have to learn how to read now, because that's the world that we live in. Okay, so that's the purpose of eyes, and therefore that's the purpose of eye movement. I studied eye movement. So I actually spent some time in China. I started my master's, and then before I finished, I went to Asia for 2 years. And I started learning to read and write Chinese. And I thought, man, this language is going to be so difficult. What happened is, as I got good at it with these writing pads, as I learned to do it, and you write the brushstrokes in order, when you get to China, you're illiterate. You can't read because nothing's in English. You're looking around, and all the signs mean absolutely nothing. And so it's like being a child again. You're asking people, you can't really speak the language either. So somehow you get along. By the end, when you start studying, you start to be able to learn to read, and you see all the patterns. And I found that reading Chinese was a whole lot easier than reading English. I mean, worlds easier. There's no comparison. I could read Chinese, and it's almost like reading a picture. And it turns out Chinese actually is hieroglyphics. It evolved from hieroglyphics. So if you think of a field is Tian, it basically just looks like somebody drawing a field. A woman just looks like that. It's a woman with her legs crossed. This hieroglyphic. Egyptian, which they tell us is hieroglyphics in school, is actually not hieroglyphics. Egyptian is more phonomic. They're basically letters. Egyptian characters did evolve out of pictures, but the pictures themselves have phonetics to them that construct as words. And people figured this out by looking at something called the Rosetta Stone, which was a big slate that was written, the same thing was written in 3 different languages. This was discovered, and so once they figured out one language, then they were able to figure out the other languages. I think they still may be working on it, but it was from Ptolemy's time, I believe the Roman Empire era. So the Chinese is the hieroglyphics, and it turned out that I could read Chinese, like there would be a big, long sentence in Chinese, and the whole thing would just come in at once, like a picture, like I was just looking at a picture. I wanted to know why this was. Why was Chinese so much easier? And there's a very specific reason. And it has to do with eye movement. Let's look at eye movement. How does the eye move itself? The eye is a ball. Let's just draw a ball. Like if we have a marble, it will give us some 3D shading. So we have a light source that's coming in over here. This is the shadow side. This isn't the eye. This is just a ball. Give it a little shadow over here. That's a ball. Now your eye is a ball, and we can look at it from a couple different perspectives. Let's say we're looking this way, and here's the eyelid, and there's our face. We have these different parts of the eye. Light is coming into your eyeball, and your eyeball is concave. Here's light coming in. We'll give you a light source. That's a light source right there. The light is coming in to your eye. And a light is a particle wave, as far as we know. It's a particle. It's like a little photon of light, we call it. It goes up and down. But it goes up and down in such a minute height that we just think of it as a beam going forward, a straight beam, even though it's a wave. Albert Einstein earned his Nobel Prize, I believe, from a paper he wrote on what's called the photoelectric effect, where I think, if I'm not mistaken, he proved that light is actually a particle going in a wave. Some people thought it was a wave, like sound. Some people thought it was a particle going straight. And Einstein did this experiment where he was able to show, I believe it was Einstein, if I'm not mistaken, that it was both a particle and a wave. And he wrote a paper on it, and he received the Nobel Prize. Now, most people believe Einstein received the Nobel Prize from his theory of relativity. That's not true. He received it from his paper on the photoelectric effect. The light comes in. The eyeball is concave. And what happens is when light comes straight at the eyeball, the light bends. B-E-N-D. It bends. So the light comes up, down, and it all bends to a single point. Therefore, the eyeball must be what we call a parabola. Parabola. P-A-R-A-B-O-L-A. Now you'll notice that dishes that receive satellite communication, if you see a satellite dish for cable television or something, it's shaped in the form of a parabola. And it's got this receiver right there because the electromagnetic waves come in. And it turns out if you have a parabola, which is a shape, a circular shape, it's a very specific kind of circular shape, a parabola, where if you throw a ball, like a tennis ball, into the parabola, boom, no matter where the ball hits, the ball will bounce to the exact same point. So the electromagnetic waves, no matter where they hit, they're all bouncing to the angle of where they're going to hit this receiver. That's why satellite dishes are shaped in a very specific shape. Now, not all dishes are parabolic, but you can create a parabolic dish. And your eye must be a parabola because the light that comes in all bends to the exact same point right there. And that's how your eye is able to receive the light. If the light, if the cornea is kind of messed up a little bit and the light misses, then you might need to wear glasses, which bends the light a little bit earlier and gets you to the retina, depending on whether the light's coming in too early or too late. That's the eyeball. And the eye needs to focus. If I'm going to look at something far away versus look at something very close, the eyeball will bend. It's a muscle that can bend. Just take a contact lens or some sort of magnifying glass, but let's say it's a plastic magnifying glass, and you could bend it so that if you're not holding it, it might look like that, but if you bend it, it might look like that. The light is going to converge at a much shorter or longer distance, depending on how much you bend this plastic magnifying glass. Well, your eyeball bends because it's a muscle, and so if I want to look further away versus at something really close, you can feel, if you want to look at your nose, you can feel your eyeballs bend in order to change the parabolic shape so that the point is going to be able to focus far away or close. That's called convergence. Convergence, the bending of the eye. Now this is important because if I'm going to take a music stand and I'm teaching somebody violin, oftentimes they have the music stand so close that their bow is going to knock into the music stand. If their bow is going to knock into the music stand, they subliminally pull their bow away. When you play the violin, you have to play so that the bow is continually perpendicular to the fingerboard. If you're about to run into the music stand, so you pull your shoulder, now all of a sudden you're not parallel to the bridge anymore. So I have to move the music stand a little bit further away. Now why have certain children pulled the music stand close to them? They feel that that's the best way for them to see. I pull the music stand a little bit further away and I have to train their eyes. Maybe they've got some type of phone or some type of computer where you hold your phone right here. If you hold it too close, you can't focus. If you hold it too far, you can't see. So you hold it right here. So I would gather that their eyes are used to being able to have something right here. But you should be able to comfortably see and focus on really anything, even miles and miles away. If you're looking out at sea and there's some island or some ship that's 20 miles out, you should be able to see that. I have to slowly train them to bring this music stand back. Otherwise, they need to be using a combination of their shoulder, their wrist, their elbow, their sternoclavicular joint in order to play. And you want to play straight. And if they all of a sudden are about to bump into the music stand, then they're going to switch all of their energy to their shoulder, and they're going to pull their shoulder back, and they're going to rotate in a circle. And we don't want that when we're playing the violin. When you're playing, you'll notice the notes are a little bit bigger in the first piano books that we use, and then they get a little bit smaller in the Bach. You don't want to start a student off with the small notes because the small notes gives the effect of pulling the music away from the eyes, and the eyes have to converge more, converge less. They have to do something different in order to see that. So if I take a music book with big notes and I hold it back here relative to where you're sitting, the notes seem to get smaller. If I just leave the book right here, the notes are bigger, but if I replace it with, let's say, the Bach score, now the notes are smaller. It's as though I took the big notes and pulled them back. So relatively speaking, the notes would be the same size if I have small notes that are close to you and big notes that are far away. We start with big notes so that we can train the eyes to be able to move. The convergence has to do with distance from the eyes. How far away is the thing from the eyes? That's one type of eye movement. So when you're teaching, if somebody is having trouble or they say they're getting a headache or something like that, it could just be we have so much media these days that people's minds are just kind of fried, and we have so many drugs that people are taking that their bodies and their heads are fried. There's that problem too. People may just need a detox, to be quite honest. There may be certain industries that don't want to hear that because that'll threaten profits, but it is what it is. As an instructor, you need to know that. So that's convergence. Distance away from the eyeball, the bending of the eyeball to shape where the light will be retained. Then there is another type of eye movement which has to do not so much with front and back, but left and right. And that is called smooth pursuit. If we have an airplane up in the sky, and obviously this is modern, maybe somebody would be looking at a bird back in the old days. We have an airplane. The airplane is going along very smoothly. It's not going to disappear and reappear over here. It's just going to fly across the sky. And if you're sitting on this plane and you're staring up at the airplane, here's you just sitting there whistling, and you're looking up at the plane, your eyeballs are able to track that airplane as it moves along. And your eyeballs are able to move very smoothly along with the airplane. That's called smooth pursuit. It's left to right, but it also involves convergence because the airplane is either coming toward you or going away from you. It's one or the other because we live in a three-dimensional space. You're converging and your eyeball is bending to go outward or inward, as well as going left to right or right to left. So your eyeball is a very complex mechanism. Smooth pursuit. So we have convergence, we have smooth pursuit, which means being able to track something that is smoothly moving. What reading involves is something called a saccade. S-A-C-C-A-D-E. Saccade. A saccade is a quick jump from one point to the next. A saccade is a quick, simultaneous movement of both eyes between two or more phases of fixation in the same direction. In contrast, in smooth pursuit movements, the eyes move slowly instead of jumps. S-A-C-C-A-D-E. And then fixation, which means you're just looking at something, you're not moving. So you have convergence, smooth pursuit, saccade, and fixation. So saccade means, let's say I'm looking at these guitars over here, and then all of a sudden I look at the speaker. Then I look at the piano. Then I look at something else. I'm not smoothly moving my eye. My eye is jumping like boom, 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 boom. I'm fixated on the guitar. I'm looking at the hole in the guitar, and in my peripheral vision, I'm taking in the rest of the guitar. Then I'm going to move over to something else. That's called a saccade. So if this is a point on the board, and this is a point on the board, what happens is you're looking at this point, and now if I want you to look at the other point, boom, you jump lightning speed to look at the other point. Yeah, I just saw your eyes do it. That's a saccade. If you're just looking at one point, that's a fixation. If you're jumping from a fixation to another fixation, that's a saccade. If you're looking at an airplane and your eyes are smoothly tracking this plane, that's called smooth pursuit. I needed to know why it was so much easier for me to read Chinese than it was to read English. The reason is, in Chinese, every single character is the same width. W-I-D-T-H. Width, meaning distance from the left side to the right, or the right side to the left. If you have characters in Chinese, every single character can fit into a box that is the same exact width, which means all of your saccades are equal distance. And they're basically like pictures. And even though this may look really strange to you now, once you start to do this, you'll see the different patterns arise. There's only a few patterns that are used in Chinese, and they just put them in different positions. So you might have something like this. It's been a while since I wrote Chinese. And this pattern right here is a microcosm of that pattern over there. And then it's got something else which may appear bigger somewhere else. But the point is, you've got these boxes that are all the same width, and your eye just goes boom, boom, boom. Your eye can do something very regular. Whereas in the English language, studies that were done where they took people or children or students, the researchers gave the students items to read, and they watched their eye movements. People had different eye movement as they were reading in the English language. what the researchers discovered was basically we can classify the English language into 3 types of words: short words, medium words, and long words. So a short word would be the word the, something 3 or 4 characters, or 1 or 2 characters. A, at, when. Once you start getting to 5 characters or more, you have what's called a medium word, like the word medium. It's 3 syllables, medium. You can read all of these short words in one fixation. Your eyeball lands right here. Your eyeball in your peripheral vision, which means your side vision. Let's put that up on the board. Peripheral, which means if I'm staring at something, the things that are coming in through the side that I can interpret, that's my peripheral vision. Very important when you're driving. You have to see your peripheral vision. Your eyeball in your peripheral vision, when you're here, will see that the next word is a medium length word. And your brain will have to make a decision, where am I going to land in terms of the fixation? Now, maybe it's a long word. Maybe it's a word like extemporaneous, or something that has a lot of characters. Extraordinary. So when you're reading, your peripheral vision gives your brain an idea of where you're going to land when you saccade from previous word to the next word. Maybe you're going to land right in the middle. And so you can just jump from this word to this word to the next word. Maybe you're going to make a mistake. Maybe the brain, they notice some people's eyes, they would land right here, and they would have to perform 2 fixations, which is more work for the eyes and the brain to do in order to get a medium word. Maybe the mind thought that it was a medium word, but it turned out it was a long word. So maybe you were going to land here. Your eyeballs were going to fixate right here when it jumped from the previous word to the next word. Over here, you can see in your peripheral vision, you need to make another fixation, so you jump over here. But then what happened was some people had to jump back. And then maybe they jumped over here. They would have to perform 1, 2, 3, 4 saccades just to read a long word. This doesn't happen in Chinese. That's why Chinese was much easier to read. It would be ideal if you could just land right here in the middle and you could make 1 saccade, jump from here to there, and interpret the words. But they found that if you've got a long word, you're going to have to make at least 2 saccades coming into the word and then to the next part of the word. Your eyeball will have to jump at least twice in order to interpret this word. Once I learned this, I started to use this to my advantage. I started to actively train my mind, and I became very aware. Once I was aware of this, I was cognizant, which means having to do with the brain, of what I was doing when I was reading. And I started to train my eyeballs to be able to use my peripheral vision and my fixations and my saccades, and very intentionally I started to change the way I was reading. People who had difficulty reading, who got headaches reading, they were misappropriating where their eyes needed to go as they moved along in a sentence. A sentence in English is random. There's short words, medium words, and long words, just in terms of the length of the word. There's kind of these arbitrary, you don't necessarily have, okay, well, this has so many letters. You just kind of, 3 or 4 or 5 letters, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 or 9 letters, and then more than that. So you can just see this is a long word, this is a medium word. And so what happened is the subjects in the research study, they were getting caught up in these words. And then sometimes they may have jumped a word in a sentence and moved on, and then they realized they missed some important piece of information, and they had to back up in the sentence, and then they didn't know where to back up, and they would back up too far, and it was just this big jumble of saccades. So you have some sentence, and then you're jumping all over the place. You're not able to control where your eye is moving. So what I did was I started to really control my eyes as I was reading. And then I heard somewhere else about this speed reading idea. They said when you have a page, there's words that are important and words that are not important. Words like these are not very important. Words like this are important. Or if we're talking about, if you're reading about a particular subject like eye movement and you're talking about cornea and retina, these are important words. You're not going to see those in a paper on music, but you'll see these in every paper. And so what I started to do is I would start to scan an entire page. If I had a piece of paper in front of me, I would scan the entire page first. I would look at all of the long words and medium words and try to find some of the important short words, if there were, although not a lot of short words that are very important. What would happen is, in my mind, I would take all of the important words and I would bring them to the forefront. And all of the non-important words, they would drop out. Imagine that you're peeling all these words off the page and you've got these words that are randomly pulled out from the page in your mind. And then the mind can connect all of these words together and forget about the not so important words. And your mind can start to paint a picture of what's being said on the page. And as you begin to do this, you get faster and faster and faster to the point where I could look at a page now and almost in a split second. One time I was visiting my grandparents. My grandfather told me they were somewhere and my grandmother picked up a magazine and she was just flipping through the pages like this. One of her friends in the book club said, "Why don't you read some of the articles? Why are you just flipping through the pages?" And my grandmother said, "I am reading the articles." she was a fast reader. She was like a blazing speed reader. This is how you can do it. You peel off all these important words, all the non-important words, just kind of lay in the background and just filter away, almost as if they're just dropping to the floor in your mind. And you start to create a web in your mind with all these important words. As you begin to do this, you will eventually, if you practice this, be able to get the idea of what's being said. Now, you do have to drill in and start to read the sentences, but what happens is you do it and you get faster and faster. You control what's being taken in by your peripheral vision, and you make a conscious decision as to where you're going to fixate on the words, and you change. If you're making mistakes, if you're fixating and you're going along and you jump too far ahead, so now you have to make a decision. You have to go back. But do you go back too far, which means you have to go here? Or do you go back right here where you can take in all of this? It's a difference between reading fast and reading slow. It's a difference between getting a headache and not getting a headache. When we read, we are reading on a single line. It turns out that as difficult and unnatural as reading is, reading music is way more difficult than reading. I mean, there's almost no comparison. When you're reading, you are reading on a single line. The sentence happens on this line. When you're reading music, you've got 5 lines up here, and you've got 5 lines down here. Then you have all these other little symbols, which you have to interpret very quickly. Then you've got this stuff over here, right? Oh my goodness, just more fixations and saccades. And they didn't even match them up. If you draw something on the bottom space here, that's an F. If you draw it on the bottom space here, it's an A. Who thought that one up? They couldn't put 2 ledger lines in the middle. This just blows reading out of the water in terms of difficulty. And now you've got these points here, which are notes. You have to interpret them. You're not just reading on a single line. You're reading up and down and left and right. And then you've got all these other symbols. And then not only do you have to change the musculature of your eyes. I can sit here perfectly still and read something. But when you're reading music, you're playing an instrument while you're reading. You're not playing an instrument while you're reading Moby Dick or War and Peace. You're not sitting there playing the violin while you're reading War and Peace. That'd be difficult, right? But that's exactly what you're doing when you're reading music. You're trying to interpret this, and you say, oh, but there's words. Well, guess what? There's words in music. Caro mio ben. There's lyrics, and you have to read the lyrics. And maybe the lyrics are down here. And maybe it's a church hymnal, and you've got 4 lyrics, or maybe they put the 4 lyrics in between the treble and the bass clef. There's no comparison. So when I tell people, hey, your child needs to come take lessons from me, they have to come take lessons from me, they're going to learn to become a speed reader. Now, how do I do it? Well, how do we learn to play? We put the metronome on 40, right? I mean, this is it. This is the key right here. 40 beats per minute. This is the secret. We go to 42, 44, 44. We just follow the Whitner metronome up. And what we're doing is we start in the first book, we have single notes. In the second book, we have 2 notes at the same time. And in the third book, we have 3 notes. We have the chords. So we're building. I can take a year to go through that first book with a child. I can take another year to go through the second book, and another year. And in 3 years, they've gone through the progressive piano books. And they're big notes, and we go slowly, and we're training their eyeballs to saccade very slowly. And then 42. And then 44, and jump up and down. So we're creating extra neurons that they won't even need when they're reading. So the people who come into my studio, because of the way I teach, you could go on to law school, whatever, and your reading is going to be so far ahead. When I advertise and I'm on the phone, and they're like, oh, tell me about your studio, tell me the benefits and all this kind of stuff, there's no comparison. They shoot up to the top of their class. It doesn't matter where they are. Because what we're doing, training at 40 beats per minute, then 42, then 44, we're training the eyeballs very slowly until they get up to 120, 150, 160. And then they're just like boom, 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 boom. And they're going fast. There you go. So as teachers, we don't need to explain this to the students, but we need to know what it is we're doing and why it works as we're teaching the students. Very good.